Have you ever had your whole world ripped out from under you on a night that was supposed to be all about family and love? Imagine sitting at your father's birthday dinner, candles glowing, laughter filling the room, and suddenly hearing your own sister's voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "Pack your bags." Everyone froze. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment, I thought she was joking, just another one of her cruel little jabs. But her face wasn't playful, it was stone cold. She meant it. The table went silent. Forks hovered in midair. My dad's smile faltered, his birthday cheer draining away. My sister leaned in, repeating the words slower this time, savoring each syllable. "Pack your bags." And in that moment, the years of tension between us erupted into something no one could ignore anymore. I wasn't just being asked to leave the table, or the house. I was being told I no longer belonged in my own family. The betrayal stung deeper than anything I'd ever felt. My father's eyes darted between us, confused, hurt, powerless. And me? I was on the edge of breaking, but then something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to sit there, humiliated, like a guest in my own home. So I did the one thing my sister never saw coming. I picked up my phone, scrolled to a number I never thought I'd use that night, and made one quick call. That call changed everything. The power in the room shifted, secrets spilled out, and my sister's carefully constructed lies began to crumble right before everyone's eyes. This wasn't just a birthday anymore. This was the night the truth came out. The air in the dining room was warm, heavy with the scent of roasted chicken, freshly baked bread, and the faint sweetness of the birthday cake waiting in the kitchen. The table was filled with relatives laughing, passing dishes around, and clinking glasses. My father sat at the head, smiling brighter than I'd seen in months. His hair, now streaked with more gray than I remembered, caught the golden light of the chandelier as he leaned back in his chair and let out a hearty laugh at something my uncle said. It was his birthday, and for once, the house felt alive again. I wanted so badly to freeze that moment, to bottle up his happiness and keep it forever. For weeks, I had been looking forward to this night. I had saved money from extra shifts at work to buy him something I knew he would love, a leather-bound journal, custom-made with his initials engraved on the cover. My dad had always been a storyteller, filling scraps of paper with memories, thoughts, and advice he never said aloud. He used to tell me that writing helped him make sense of life. When I found the journal, I knew it was perfect. As I slid the wrapped box toward him, his eyes softened in surprise, and when he opened it, his face lit up in a way that made my chest ache with pride. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice trembling slightly. He pulled me into a hug, and for a brief second, I felt like his favorite, but not everyone at the table shared that warmth. My sister Laura's smile didn't reach her eyes. She sat across from me, her fork clinking against her plate as she forced herself to appear polite. Anyone else might have thought she was simply tired or distracted, but I knew that look too well. It was the same look she'd given me my entire life, the one that said, "How dare you take what belongs to me?" Laura had always been the golden one. The one my father bragged about to neighbors, the one whose framed certificates lined the hallway wall. If she walked into a room, it was as though the world tilted toward her. And I had been the shadow trailing behind, the sibling people forgot to ask about. She had been perfect, and I had been ordinary. At least, that's how she wanted everyone to see it. As the night carried on, laughter echoed around the table, but there was a tension building beneath it, like a storm waiting to break. Laura's gaze kept drifting toward me, sharp and measuring. I pretended not to notice, focusing on passing plates, laughing at jokes, and soaking up my father's joy. But under the table, my hands clenched into fists. I had been through this before, her subtle digs, her little comments that made me look foolish in front of everyone. Tonight, though, she hadn't said a word. And that silence was louder than anything. Then came the moment that changed everything. The cake was brought in, glowing with flickering candles. We all sang, my father grinning wide, his eyes glistening as he looked at the flames before closing them to make his wish. The room was filled with warmth, with love, with everything a family should be. And then, as the candles went out and the room dipped into a brief hush, Laura leaned slightly forward, her voice slicing through the cheer like a razor. "Pack your bags," she whispered at first. I thought I had misheard. The words were so quiet, almost drowned out by the clapping and laughter. But her eyes were locked on mine, her lips curling with a satisfaction that froze my blood. She said it again, louder this time, every syllable deliberate. "Pack your bags." The room fell silent. My aunt's hands stilled mid-clap, forks hovered, and my father's smile faltered. All eyes turned to Laura, confusion flickering across their faces. My stomach twisted, and heat rushed to my cheeks. "What did you just say?" My father asked slowly, his voice cautious, as if he already feared the answer. Laura didn't hesitate. She straightened in her chair, her voice rising with boldness now that she had everyone's attention. "I said she needs to pack her bags. She doesn't belong here anymore." She jabbed a finger in my direction, her tone sharp and cutting. "She's been taking advantage of you, Dad. Staying here because she has nowhere else to go. It's pathetic. You deserve better than to be manipulated in your own home." The room erupted into murmurs, my relatives exchanging stunned glances. My chest tightened, shame burning through me. I wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear from the judgmental eyes circling me like vultures. My father raised a hand to quiet everyone, his eyes darting between us. "Laura," he said firmly, "this is not the time, and it's certainly not the place." But she only smiled, a cruel curve of her lips that told me she had been waiting for this moment. "No, Dad. This is exactly the time. You need to hear the truth. She's been leeching off you, making you think she's the helpful one, the caring one. But she's just using you." Each word was like a slap. I opened my mouth, desperate to defend myself, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, my voice trapped beneath the weight of humiliation. All I could do was stare at her, my heart pounding in my ears, while my father looked more and more torn with every second that passed by. In that instant, something inside me shifted. I had always let Laura control the story, always let her paint me as the weak one. But as I looked around the table, at the confusion, the doubt, the disappointment, I felt a fire rising in me I hadn't felt before. She thought she could end me with a few words, destroy me in front of everyone. But she didn't know what I was capable of, and that was the night I decided I wasn't going to be her shadow anymore. The silence after Laura's words was suffocating. It pressed down on me, heavier than the air in that dining room, thicker than the laughter that had filled it only moments before. My father sat frozen, his hand resting on the table, fingers curled slightly as though he couldn't decide whether to clench them into fists or fold them in prayer. His eyes, those tired, kind eyes, flicked between me and Laura, searching desperately for the truth buried in her venom. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but my voice had lodged itself somewhere deep inside my chest, smothered by the weight of humiliation. Laura didn't stop. Her tone sharpened, each word designed to slice away whatever dignity I had left. "Dad, open your eyes. She's been mooching off you for months. Acting like she's helping, like she's this perfect child who suddenly cares so much. But let's be real, she's staying here because she has no other option. She's lazy, she's selfish, and she's using you." Her voice carried across the table, and every relative sat rigid, caught between disbelief and unease. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, whispering something to my uncle. My cousins stared at their plates, suddenly fascinated by the patterns on the china, afraid to look at me. And through it all, Laura's smug smile stretched wider, feeding off the silence, feeding off my father's uncertainty. Inside, a storm raged. For years, I had tolerated her cruelty, her sly comments at family gatherings, her need to overshadow me, the way she painted herself as flawless while leaving me cast in the role of disappointment. I had let her play the part of the golden child without protest, convincing myself it was easier that way. But something about the way she said those words, so sure of herself, so certain she had me trapped, snapped something deep within me. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself, and finally spoke. My voice trembled at first, soft and uncertain, but it cut through the whispers. You don't know what you're talking about, Laura. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, don't I? Then go ahead, explain to everyone why you're still here. Why you can't stand on your own 2 feet. She leaned forward, eyes glinting with malice. Or maybe you can't because you're too comfortable bleeding Dad dry. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were so easy for her to sell. That had always been Laura's gift, twisting half-truths into daggers and disguising lies as concern. I could feel the room tilting in her favor, the doubt creeping into people's eyes. My father shifted in his chair, his mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. He looked torn. That was when I realized. If I stayed silent, if I let her run unchecked, she would win. Not just tonight, but every night after. She would cement herself as the righteous daughter, the protector of our father, and I would forever be branded the parasite. I straightened in my chair, meeting her gaze head-on. You've always needed me to be the weak one, haven't you? You've always needed someone to stand beneath you so you could feel taller. My voice grew stronger with each word. But maybe you're the one afraid of what happens when the truth comes out. Her smirk faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. She recovered quickly, crossing her arms and letting out a scoff. Truth? Please. You wouldn't know the truth if it slapped you in the face. But I did know the truth. And I had been carrying it like a loaded weapon for weeks. Every late night I had spent piecing together proof, every whisper of suspicion I had chased down, it had all led me here. Laura thought she was untouchable, that her mask of perfection was unbreakable. What she didn't know was that I had the power to rip it off in front of everyone. I didn't reveal it yet. Not then. Timing was everything, and if I played my hand too early, she would wriggle out of it like she always did. No, I would let her dig her own grave a little deeper. Damn, why? Father finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. Laura, this isn't the way to handle things. If you have something to say, we'll discuss it later. Tonight is supposed to be about family. But Laura wasn't done. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her figure towering over the table like a shadow. No, Dad. Tonight is about truth. And the truth is, she's been lying to you. She's not who you think she is. I could feel every eye in the room burning into me, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for me to confirm or deny the accusations. My heart raced, my palms slick with sweat. And then, almost instinctively, I reached for my phone in my pocket, my thumb brushing against the screen. I had one number saved there, one call I never thought I'd have to make in the middle of my father's birthday dinner. But as Laura's voice dripped with poison, I knew I might need it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to run from her games. I wasn't going to let her dictate the story. If she wanted a war, she was going to get one. That night, sitting at the dinner table, surrounded by family who didn't know who to believe, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not leave this house in shame. Laura had declared the battlefield, but she had no idea I was already armed with the truth, and though I didn't know it yet, that truth would change everything. The night carried on with the kind of tension that clung to the walls and refused to loosen its grip. Every laugh after Laura's outburst sounded forced, every word seemed measured, and even the flickering candles on the table looked uneasy. My father tried to steer the conversation back to lighter things, asking my uncle about his new business, making small jokes, but the damage had already been done. The celebration had soured, poisoned by Laura's accusations. I sat there, my food untouched, forcing myself to breathe evenly while my sister basked in the discomfort she had created. Laura was clever. She didn't press further, not yet. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine with a look of triumph. She had planted the seed of doubt in everyone's mind, and she knew it. That was her style, never burning everything down at once, but rather letting her words spread like slow poison, weakening me from the inside. I could feel the weight of eyes on me, some sympathetic, some suspicious. My aunt gave me a small nod of encouragement, as if to say ignore her, but even she looked unsettled. That I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing fresh air. As I stepped into the hallway, the sound of clinking glasses and hushed murmurs followed me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking out of a courtroom after a trial where the verdict hadn't been decided yet. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, staring at the name saved under my contacts. Mr. Ellis is my father's lawyer. Weeks ago, when I first stumbled across inconsistencies in Dad's bank statements, I hadn't wanted to believe it. I thought maybe it was a mistake, or maybe he had forgotten about withdrawals he made. But the amounts were too large, too frequent. When I dug deeper, when I saw the forged signatures and the transfers leading back to Laura's accounts, my stomach had dropped. It was her. She had been stealing from the man who trusted her most, hiding behind her golden reputation. I had told Mr. Ellis everything, gathering documents, piecing together proof, but I had never found the courage to bring it up to Dad. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. Now, that time had been forced upon me. I didn't make the call yet. My thumb hovered over the screen, my chest tight. I could hear Laura's voice drifting from the dining room, light and cheerful now, as if her venomous words had never been spoken. She was trying to cover her tracks, to paint herself once again as the doting daughter. My father chuckled softly at something she said, and the sound pierced me like a blade. It wasn't his fault. He wanted peace, wanted to believe both his children loved him equally, but it stung all the same. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath. Not yet. If I called Mr. Ellis now, the evening would explode into chaos, and though part of me wanted that, another part wanted Laura to expose herself even further. If I was going to bring her down, I wanted her lies laid bare in front of everyone. I wanted her to trap herself. So I returned to the table, sitting quietly, waiting. Laura noticed my absence but said nothing. Her eyes flicked to me, a flicker of amusement crossing her face, as though she believed I had retreated to cry. Let her think that. Let her believe she had already won. The rest of the dinner dragged on. People tried to salvage the mood, but it was like patching a sinking ship. My cousins left early, my uncle gave Dad an awkward hug, and one by one, the guests trickled out until only immediate family remained. The air felt heavier without the buffer of noise, and Laura seemed to sense her opportunity to strike again. Dad carried dishes into the kitchen. She turned to me with a sneer hidden behind a smile. So, when are you leaving? Tomorrow morning? Tonight? I can help you pack if you'd like. Her words dripped with false sweetness, loud enough for Dad to overhear. I met her gaze, forcing myself to stay calm. Why are you so desperate to see me gone, Laura? I asked softly as she tilted her head, feigning innocence. Because you don't belong here. You've overstayed your welcome. Dad deserves peace, and you, well, you're nothing but trouble. Dad entered the room just as she said it, a frown creasing his forehead. Laura, he warned, enough. But she wasn't finished. No, Dad. I'm not going to stop telling the truth just because it's uncomfortable. She's dragging you down, and if you can't see it, then someone has to make you. Her voice rose, sharp and insistent, and the words echoed through the now empty dining room. It was no longer just a jab, it was a declaration. And in that moment, I realized. She had done exactly what I needed her to do. She had revealed her true face in front of Dad, her cruelty unmasked. I looked at her, steady and unflinching. You want me gone? Fine. But when the truth comes out, we'll see who really doesn't belong here. The room fell silent again. The tension thick enough to choke on. Dad stared at me, then at Laura, confusion etched deep into his features. My sister's smug smile faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly recovered, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. Because tomorrow, when the sun rose, I would make that call. And Laura's world, the perfect world she had built on lies, would begin to crumble. That night, as I lay in bed, the voices of the evening replayed in my head. Her accusations, my father's silence, the whispers of our relatives. But beneath the chaos, one truth rang clear: Laura had drawn the battle lines, and I was ready to fight. The next morning the house felt different, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the poison of last night. The warmth of the birthday celebration was gone, replaced with a quiet unease that clung to every corner. My father barely spoke. During breakfast, he stirred his coffee, staring into it as if the answers to all his questions might rise from the steam. Laura, on the other hand, was radiant. She hummed under her breath, moving through the kitchen with the smug energy of someone who thought she had already won. Every time her eyes met mine, there was a flash of triumph, as though she could see me packing my suitcase in her mind. I said little. I sat at the table, my toast untouched, my hands folded tightly in my lap. But inside, I was waiting. Every cruel glance Laura threw my way, every silence from my father, every ounce of humiliation I had felt the night before, it was all fueling me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done shrinking into shadows, done letting Laura narrate my life for me. Today, she would face the truth she had hidden so carefully. When Dad left the room to take a phone call, Laura leaned across the table, her voice low and sharp. You should be gone by tonight. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I met her stare, calm and steady. Funny how desperate you are to see me leave. Almost like you're afraid of what might come out if I stay. Her smile twitched, just slightly, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head with that same mocking sweetness. You really don't know when to quit, do you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because even as she spoke, I was already pulling out my phone, my fingers steady as I scrolled to the number I had been holding on to. My thumb hovered for only a second before I pressed the screen. The ringing tone filled my ear, and with each passing second, I felt my pulse slow, my resolve harden. Mr. Ellis, I said when he answered. It's time. Can you come over today? Laura frowned, her head snapping toward me, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Who was that? She demanded, her voice rising with sudden sharpness. You'll find out soon enough, I replied quietly. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. Dad busied himself in the garden, avoiding both of us, while Laura's unease grew. She paced the living room, throwing occasional glances at me, her earlier confidence cracking around the edges. She didn't know who I had called, but she knew enough to sense the danger. For once, I was the one in control, and she hated it when the knock at the door finally came that afternoon. Laura's head whipped toward it, her face draining of color. I rose calmly, my footsteps steady, and opened it to find Mr. Ellis standing there, a neat folder tucked under his arm, his expression serious. Thank you for coming, I said, stepping aside, but Laura's composure shattered. What is he doing here? She snapped, her voice sharp with panic. My father entered from the garden, wiping his hands on a towel, confusion written all over his face. Mr. Ellis? What's going on? The lawyer set the folder on the dining table, his voice calm but firm. I'm here because there are things you need to see, Mr. Carter. Things that have been hidden from you for too long. He opened the folder, sliding a stack of documents onto the table. Bank statements, signatures, withdrawal slips, evidence I had collected and given to him weeks earlier. Laura lunged forward, her face pale, her hands trembling as she tried to snatch the papers away. This is ridiculous. She's making things up, Dad. You can't actually believe. Sit down, Laura, Mr. Ellis said firmly. His tone was one that brokered no argument. My father's hands shook as he picked up the first document, his eyes scanning the numbers, the signatures, the trail of money that led straight to Laura. I watched his face change, confusion giving way to shock, then disbelief, then a grief so deep it seemed to hollow him out. Laura, his voice cracked, barely a whisper. Tell me this isn't true. She stammered, her words tangled. It's not what it looks like. I was just Dad, please, I can explain. But the evidence spoke louder than her lies. Page after page, transaction after transaction, it was all laid bare. She hadn't just taken money, she had manipulated him, forged his signature, treated his trust as a tool for her own gain. The golden daughter, the one who claimed to protect him, had been the one bleeding him dry. The room was silent except for the sound of my father's ragged breathing. He looked at her, his eyes wet with betrayal. After everything I've done for you, how could you? Laura's mask cracked completely then. She fell to her knees, tears spilling down her cheeks, her hands clawing at the air as if she could still spin a new story, still charm her way back into his trust. Dad, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was going to pay it back, I swear, I just needed help, and her eyes darted to me, blazing with desperation. She set me up. She's the liar, not me. But it was too late. The truth was there in black and white, undeniable. And for once, no amount of charm or manipulation could save her. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching her facade collapse was enough. I simply stood there, silent, as my father closed the folder and set it aside, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. This changes everything, he said quietly, his voice breaking, and it did. In that moment, the golden child was no longer untouchable. The family had seen her for who she truly was. And for the first time in my life, the shadow I had been living in began to lift. The air after Mr. Ellis left was thick with silence. The folder still lay on the table, its pages spread open like a wound that refused to close. My father hadn't moved in minutes. He sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, his head buried in his hands. The man who had always been our rock, the one who faced every hardship with quiet strength, looked broken, and that was harder to witness than anything Laura had done to me. Laura, on the other hand, had crumpled into a mess on the living room floor. Her perfect hair was tangled, her cheeks streaked with mascara, her body shaking with sobs that sounded less like regret and more like desperation. She kept repeating the same words over and over. I'm sorry, Dad. Please, I didn't mean it. I'll fix it, I swear. Each plea grew weaker, emptier, as though she herself no longer believed them. I stood by the window, my arms crossed tightly against my chest. For years, I had dreamed of a moment where Laura would finally be exposed for what she was, but now that it was here, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had one. All I felt was tired. Tired of the games. Tired of the lies, tired of the endless competition she had turned our lives into. Finally, my father raised his head. His eyes were red, his face hollow. He looked first at me, then at Laura, and for a long moment he said nothing. The weight of his silence was unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hoarse, but it carried a finality that chilled me. Laura, he said, you need to leave. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face contorting in shock. What? No, Dad, please, you can't mean that. I'm your daughter. You can't just throw me out. I can't keep you here after what you've done, he replied, his tone firmer now. You've betrayed my trust. You've stolen from me. And worst of all, you've tried to destroy your own sister to cover it up. I won't allow that kind of cruelty under my roof. She crawled toward him on her knees, her hands clutching at his leg, her voice breaking into a shriek. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. Please, I'll change, I'll do better, I promise, don't do this to me. My father gently pried her hands away, his face etched with grief. You've had too many chances, Laura. This is your choice catching up to you, not mine. Pack your things. Her wails filled the room, echoing off the walls, but there was no changing his decision. For once, the man who had spent his life trying to keep peace in the family had drawn a line that would not be crossed. I watched it all quietly, my emotions a storm I couldn't fully name. Part of me pitied her, this broken figure who had wrapped her identity so tightly around perfection that when it unraveled, she had nothing left. But another part of me knew this was justice. This was the consequence she had tried so hard to escape. She stumbled upstairs to her room, slamming the door behind her. The sounds of drawers yanking open and bags being stuffed echoed through the house. My father sat back down, his shoulders sagging, and for the first time that day, his eyes met mine. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words were so soft I almost didn't hear them. Sorry for what? I asked, for not seeing it sooner. For letting her treat you the way she did. For making you feel like you had to fight for your place in this family. His voice broke again. You were never the problem. I should have told you that long ago. My throat tightened, and I had to blink hard to keep the tears back. It's not your fault, Dad. She knew how to play her part. We all believed it. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. Not anymore. You don't have to live in her shadow. You never did. You're stronger than you know. For a long time, we sat there in silence, the weight of everything settling around us. And then the heavy thud of Laura's suitcase echoed down the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes swollen. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, fragile in a way that almost made me forget her cruelty. Almost, she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. My father simply nodded toward the door. She hesitated, her gaze flickering. To me, filled with something between hatred and sorrow, and then she turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a finality that shook the entire house. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not suffocating, not poisoned. It was the silence of something ending, of wounds being exposed so they could finally heal. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought back to her words at the dinner table. Pack your bags. She had meant them as my exile, my humiliation. But in the end, she was the one who had to leave. And maybe that was the most fitting justice of all. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt seen. I felt free, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew this was the beginning of something new, not just for me, but for my father too. The lies were gone, the masks torn away, and all that was left was truth. Painful, messy, but real. Sometimes it only takes one call, one moment of courage, to turn an entire story upside down. And on the night of my father's birthday, that's exactly what I did. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Silent Revenge for more powerful stories of justice and payback.